Right, good morning. Today we're going to talk about sight, perception, and vision. And this is a topic that's kind of been on my mind. I've been running it through, just kind of thinking about how we live, move, and perceive our visual world. So let me give you the three Hebrew words for sight, perception, and vision. They all seem to be the same English word, but in Hebrew, they all mean something different and give us direction and action toward how we should move and how we are visually stimulated, how we are to act upon that visual stimulation, and how we are to manifest that visual stimulation. So the three Hebrew words are mareh, that's your sight. That is how you see, that is how you look, that is what happens when light comes in through your eyes, hits your optic nerve, your receptors activate and put back out a picture. Okay, I'll further explain those a little bit more as we go on. So that's your sight. Your perception, or how you interpret those things, is the Hebrew word chosen. So I like to remember that by saying the chosen must have chosen. Kind of sounds the same. Okay, so you have mareh, chosen, and the last one is visionary. That is to take in all those things, to have the perception, and then to interpret them, and then to manifest them in the proper way that they're supposed to be expressed in our natural and visual world. So that's the Hebrew word ro'ah. You probably hear that word when you think about a prophet or a seer. We see those in scripture. It's kind of romanticized and mysticized in our Western culture, but a person who was a ro'ah or had ro'ah, who was a visionary or had vision, was able to interpret what seemed basic to the natural world, interpret it through and then to present it in a way that is palatable, decent and in order, and understandable to everyone else who did not have that sight or that vision, depending on how it was given. If it was something that was just saw and watching, like the potter at the potter's wheel, or if it was something as extravagant as the vision that was given to the prophet Ezekiel, right, where you're seeing all these different wonderful things, or even the prophet Isaiah, or even the book of Revelation, and how John was given a glimpse into the unraveling of what we perceive and see in our modern world. All right, so let's get back to mareh, this idea of sight. When you see something, most of the time, if we live in our general environment, we see things that we are familiar with all the time. It's not until we step outside of our environment that we get to experience and see things that we've never seen before. And so sight can be a gift, and sometimes it can be a rough thing to have as well. When we are used to seeing things and we have had practice perceiving and interpreting those things, we walk away with a lot more information, and we're able to interpret it in a way that makes sense to us. When we see new things, whether it's a new bug, where we scream and go, "What is that?" and we take a look at it, we Google it online. When we see that thing that's new, we have to move into something called perception, which is now how we interpret that information. And that's the part of looking it up. What is this thing that I've never seen before? Getting information. Oh, it's not poisonous. It's just a potato bug. That's pretty cool. Hey, somebody come over and look at that. Or when we are seeing something or introduced to something that we've never experienced before, we look at it. If it's something dangerous or something we should step away from, we go, you know what? That is a poisonous bug. If it bites you, you'll die in 3.2 seconds. We're either going to kill it or step away from it. That is how we function in our natural ability to perceive and understand. What disrupts perception are our sensory impressions that are distorted by trauma. That means sight, touch, taste, smell, and hearing. It's the basic idea and basic principle of the Hebraic life. It's built around things that you can see, touch, taste, feel, hear, and take in that information, and then you're supposed to process it through a normal functioning, non-traumatic brain, and then come out on the other side with the truth, not a truth, the truth about whatever that thing is. When sensory impressions are traumatized, or when you first experience something and that thing has a negative connotation attached to it, which is considered trauma, then when you experience that thing, even if it isn't something that respond that way. So if we come across a potato bug, and at one time in a person's life 50 million potato bugs came out of a hole and freaked them out, there's nothing you can tell them about that thing not being harmful, not being poisonous, not being something that is going to scare them or do something to them. Their sensory impression has been corrupted by a previous experience. This is why the renewal of the mind is so imperative on this walk. Because as Hebrews, we're not just operating with sight, mare, what we can see in front of us. We are also having to operate and use hosen, because we're chosen. Remember that. We have to use perception. And our perception has to be filtered through wisdom and understanding and truth. When our perception is not filtered through wisdom, understanding, and truth, it will mar our sight. And it cuts us off from being a visionary, where now we will lead people and tell them things and give them foresight into things that are not true, because we filtered our sight and our perception through our trauma, and we gave a distorted vision. The last one, which is, we'll move to perception. Perception is very important. Perception can be reality, but perception is not always true. I'll say that again. Perception can be reality, but perception is not always true. How a person perceives something is based upon how they processed that information through their sensory impressions or their five senses. How that thing actually was may not be how they perceived it, but perception is the reality that they created. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but your sight functions based upon your brain. A man who is single-eyed, his body has light. The Messiah tells us that, right? A man who is double-eyed, meaning he does not match those two things together. His sight and his perception are separate. He can see one thing and he's going to interpret it as something else. That man is double-eyed, and inside of his body is darkness. If perception and sight do not line up to produce truth, that person, those people, you, me, we don't have vision. Because it takes more than just seeing something to understand it. It takes now taking out the time and having information about what you see and processing that information properly based upon truth, which obviously includes Torah, and coming away with a conclusion. Last one is visionary. We live in a culture and we live amongst people who thrive on the wisdom, intelligence, vision, experience, dream, manifestation, whatever the case may be, of other people. And the reality of vision and a visionary is, a visionary has to always line up with Yah's end game. A visionary, person who has vision, a creative, whoever the person is, their thing, especially if they are a conscious Hebrew who is trying to walk out the laws, precepts, and commandments of the Most High, their vision and their sight and their perception have to be single, because they are not getting it from themselves, they're getting it from, as they say, the Father. So when we look and we're trying to be visionary and we're trying to work through life and business and other things, when we go into new endeavors, when we are dealing with family and friends and just operating in our world, we have to see beyond what we're seeing in front of us. Scripture teaches us that we don't live in a world where we just wrestle against flesh and blood, but it's principalities and darkness and realms and other things that are unseen. And so as we're dealing and living and working in a world that is all based on how we perceive it, then we do, in fact, have the ability to affect change upon the world that we live in. If we're experiencing something, most of the time, I will say most of the time, when it comes to people and how we perceive them, it's based upon our interpretation. How people perceive us is based upon their trauma, their trigger, their interpretation, or their perception. So as we're moving through, and we're learning these new Hebrew words, and we're gardening, and we're looking out, and we're trying to establish a better way of interacting with one another, in processing the information about the times that we're in understanding how we should be moving, how we should be dealing with one another, what should draw us off track. And what I mean by off track is there are some things that happen in life that do pause, and they cause us to pause and regroup and regather. But then there are other things that are distractions. And in order to determine what those things are and how we move forward and how we're being triggered, and do the introspection necessary to move forward and to to really be in a place where we can be visionaries for the kingdom, we have to deal with our sight and how we interpret that information being our perception, so that the Father can use us as visionaries to be able to bring forth and manifest the things that we're not seeing. A lot of the times when we feel like we're still living in the past, or we're still living in old situations, a lot of it is based upon how we're interpreting information, how we're perceiving it, and how we are not purging and ridding ourselves of either things or people that cause those things to be distorted. And we loop and we loop and we loop on old information, never inputting new information. The brain is very powerful. And that's why the war of the enemy is not in the world. The things that are distracting us are like, it's like kids play. But the real war is in the mind. And it's in how we think and how we perceive other people, and how we move and how we pass judgment. And so our focus is to be mindful. I know that word is being thrown around a lot in the esoteric circles, but the real understanding of being mindful is taking every thought captive and being able to dismiss the things that are not true, and to focus in and process the things that are true, so that we can bring forth and manifest what we're supposed to manifest. I'm using that word manifest because I don't know how many people understand the function of the elect in this, and I'm gonna use this word too, in this realm, and how our physical bodies and the physical things that we perceived are only based upon the information that we've been allowed to understand and see in our tangible world. The Father is infinite and limitless in his understanding of everything and in his vision of everything. And so when we begin to align ourselves with him, our ability to see through bullshit, I'll just be quite frank with it, and people's bullshit and the stuff that's distracting us should become more and more keen. And we have to get better at when things are distracting and when things are BS and when they are not things that serve the higher purpose, that we have to begin to move and eliminate those things, because they are scales on our eyes and they keep us distracted and from seeing the bigger picture. I don't care if it's news. I don't care if it's your favorite Hebrew teacher. I don't care if it's a person on your job. I don't care if it's a person in your house. Every single one of us has been given a task and given something that we're supposed to bring to the table. We were not awakened. We are not called. We are not chosen to sit back and be distracted, manipulated, and thrown off track by the things that are put out there to do those things. That is the thing. That's what they're put here to do. It is our responsibility and I saw somebody post this, to manage the control tower. The mind, the authority within, if that authority can be swayed, then your whole life can be turned upside down. And then the control is then given to whoever is more powerful than you. And if that authority within has not been submitted to the creator, then there is no way, when things really begin to happen and when things that we excuse me, see with our eyes begin to deceive us, that if we don't give that authority over, then how can we turn to, okay, what I'm seeing may not be true, but what I know to be true is true. And so knowing what is truth supersedes even our sight sometimes. And that's when you move into the category of being visionary, where when you see a person, they come up to you and they're like upset and they're all in their feelings. Our base nature, our sight, our triggers tell us fight or flight. Okay, I need to be on guard. I'm going to argue back. I'm going to fight. Our perception says, I didn't do anything to this person. I don't know why this person feels like this. Sometimes we don't even know the people. Maybe they're just having a bad day. Let me employ some of the truth that I've been given through my studies. Let me bring this into this realm. Let me not keep it up here in the spiritual realm, but let me bring the truth that I've learned from Torah and from scripture study into this realm and say, okay, a kind word turns away wrath. Good morning. Not a good morning for me. And you're like, oh, well, what caused your morning to go so upside down? And then guess what? It begins to de-escalate, and the person's like, well, this morning I da-da-da-da-da-da, and this da-da-da-da-da, and it's like, wow, I am really sorry to hear that. You know what? If it's somebody you don't know and you're in a coffee shop, or like I'm getting ready to go get a smoothie, let me buy you a smoothie this morning. I know you're in here and you have had a long day, and let me just kind of in some way alleviate some of that. Really? Absolutely. And you don't know how you change the trajectory of that person's day. You didn't argue with them. You didn't let it rub off on you. You didn't get upset. It literally shifted a mood in a space. They're not going to go on and ruin anybody else's day. They might go on and say, man, I need to pay it forward. I can't believe somebody did that. Man, maybe what I was thinking about wasn't a big deal. Whatever the case may be, we are not just put here to live and move in the way that it benefits us, but also in a way to elevate the vibration overall. It's not just how it serves us, but also how we serve other people. When it comes to people who are in our space, being understanding, knowing that we're not always all on 10, knowing that we're not always our best self, knowing that we're not always in that place, being willing to be humble, to apologize, to seek reconciliation, to be in a position to say, you know what? I was a real jerk this morning, or I was not having the best day, and let me provide some solutions on how I can now fix where I am. It moves past sight, what happened, perception, the truth of it, and now visionary. How can I now begin to repair or unravel all the trauma that exists, not only in my own space, but in the space around me, in the city I'm chosen to operate, and then eventually on a global, in a global way. We are not just put here to be inanimate objects. We're not just put here to serve the needs and the wants of people, but we're also here to, like I said, bring that visionary part of how can I, with my function and with my place, do these things. And it's something that we have to practice do every day. Nobody does it perfect. I do not do it perfect. Believe me, more wrong than right happens when we're trying to go through all these things, because we're going through and we're digging through a lot of trauma. But a lot of people are not experiencing the wholeness of coming out of a disenfranchised, traumatic experience that a lot of us experience, especially in as people of color and in the oppressions we experience everywhere. And then for other people, not just of color, but who have lived lives of trauma, and how we're constantly doing the works and constantly trying to figure out and deal with people and the people around us so that we can be who we were put here to be. We were not put here to just work a job. We were not put here, and not to negate the importance of family, but we were put here to whether it is in our job or in our family or in our relationship, we were also supposed to bring something. So if it was to be a mom and a wife, then what are we bringing to that? Not just the functions of cooking, cleaning, relations, and travel, and making people happy and keeping home. Yes, those are all imperative, but what after the sight and after the truth and the perception, then what about the visionary? How can I do that my way, the way I was put on the planet to bring that thing so that it shows the glory of the Most High? I saw something that was on here that said closed captions. I will speak to the moderators and see if we can get this closed captioned, especially for people who do not have physical sight, which leads me to the other thing. Just because a person lacks physical sight doesn't mean that they can't have perception and they can't have vision. And I'm going to use the most popular person we all know, Stevie Wonder. He doesn't have sight, visual sight, but he interprets the things around him and what he feels from around him, and he brings forth vision. He can make you see what you couldn't see, and you have eyes. And that's how we should be. We should be so in tune with our purpose and with what the Father has on our path to do, that what we see doesn't throw us off, but the truth of it, the perception and the vision he gave us, is so powerful that other people can see past everything, and they are then moved into a position where they can also balance themselves out, move into a place of shalom, get rid of the roots of traumas and triggers, and have a single eye where light begins to enter. I'll tell you a story and I'm gonna get out of your way because I have to head to work. About 3 or 4 years ago, I had LASIK eye surgery, and I probably talked about this in other videos. And so I spent the greater part of my life without proper vision. So what happens with your eyes when you get LASIK eye surgery is, well, in my case, your eye is supposed to be like a sphere, and my eye kind of coned out. And so when light would come through my eye and try to reach the optic nerve and the receptor, before the light could come back, the light would diminish and it would give a blurry picture. So what the doctor ended up doing was taking the eye, making it into whatever perfect shape it had to be in, and immediately when the light came into my eye and I looked back, the picture was clear. Sometimes it's like that with trauma, triggers, and the things that keep us from perceiving correctly. Light is trying to get in, and that's why I don't ever discredit or write anybody off for where they are or what they're experiencing, because it's not that people are not trying to receive light. And that's what is so weird when we're dealing with Hebrews and we see like, man, you kind of off. It's not that they don't want light, and it's not that light is not getting in. It's that somehow the vessel is marred, and the vessel is not willing to submit to the hands of the master fixer so that he can remold the vessel. So sometimes we're so busy trying to get light in that we forget that the vessel is off, and that the vessel first has to be calibrated before the light gets in. So we're pumping all this light in, and it's causing pride. And the whole time, the person's perception is not truth and their vision is off. But what Yah does when he gets us, and it's not a very comfortable process, and he has to keep doing it because we have the tendency to kind of go backwards. He takes the vessel and those who submit to his will, and he calibrates it in a way, and he puts it in a place to where when the light comes in, at first it's painful. It's like, oh, it's illuminating these dark places. But when that light comes in, it's coming in a way that the vessel can receive it, and it's clearing out the junk. It's clearing out the junk, calibrating the vessel, clearing out the junk. And then when we finally open our eyes, we're supposed to be able to perceive correctly. What has happened in this walk, and it has been one of the frustrating things to me in recent months, and I'm beginning to get over that frustration, as you guys may be able to tell, is that people are pushing light into people whose vessels have not been calibrated. And we snatch them off the potter's wheel because we want the vessel. We want to use the vessel. We see the gifts and talents and abilities, but we haven't waited for the vessel to be calibrated so that the Father can constantly pump light in, removing the darkness, and so that the people can actually be visionaries for the kingdom. And so what we're left with is halfway cattywampus vessels who have good things in, but a bunch of mess too. And when the light pushes in, it causes the vessel to begin to crumble, and then all the contents fall out. And then we're left to look at all the contents that have fallen out in all these people. And then nobody thinks like, hey, let's not just keep trying to stare at this person or these people or this community's contents. Let's go ahead and put them back on the potter's wheel, let them heal, and then when the Father begins to fill them, they have a vessel that has been proven to be able to withhold the pressure of what it takes to be a visionary or to be this person. And I'm one of those people. I can definitely say that I've been in that position where, yes, gifts, talents, and abilities, but when it's time for me to recalibrate, it's difficult because people don't understand. And sometimes it takes private time, and sometimes it takes away time, and sometimes it takes a lot of things. And I'm learning as I get older that the time it takes to recalibrate is nobody else's business. And when the Father has recalibrated and allowed the light to come in and illuminate dark spaces, then I can come back and be the visionary or be the person necessary for the purpose that I've placed here to do. But we have to be okay with that space. I don't know if you guys have ever read about the story of Enoch. It's a very interesting overall story. But in the beginning, it talks about how the people began to be afraid of Enoch because he would come to the people, share what he'd been filled with, and then he would go back. And the more time he spent going back and getting recalibrated, the less people wanted to hear from him because his vision was beyond their understanding, because they weren't doing the same calibrating and getting the same understanding and dealing with their traumas and their idolatry in their hearts. So it's one of those things that we really need to really think about in these last days, because scripture does talk about how our sight is going to be manipulated in these last days, which will then mess up our perception and which will cause us not to be visionaries. So we need to focus on those things. We need to submit our will and our authority within to the one higher than us, that can then, when we are no longer given the right things in our line of sight, that we can then perceive and what's the word I'm thinking about? We can perceive and use our discernment in order to determine how we should move forward, and then we can begin to share and illuminate those around us. I really appreciate you guys spending the first little 30 minutes of your morning with me, and have a good day. Shalom.